want to ask you, educate our audience a little bit about this DNA paternity testing. What is happening in California? I hear there are all sorts of lawsuits going back and forth. Help us understand.
Well, my area is actually looking at something called paternity fraud.
Yes.
And paternity fraud is when the woman knowingly labels the wrong man as the father of the child. And this means that she either knows absolutely that he's not the father, or she knows that there's a good possibility that he's not the father. And this is an issue that is global. This is an issue that is affecting men everywhere. So men in Australia, men in China, men in the Caribbean are arguing now for mandatory paternity testing.
Wow.
And so they want everyone at birth. We will not have this problem anymore if everyone at birth is given a DNA test. And so this actually has a lot of issues related to it, like the rights of the child, the right, you know, we see all of these shows where they come on TV and give the child's whole medical history and say you're not the father. You know, so the child is impacted, the father is impacted, and a lot of people don't realize that men bond with the children. And it is like a death to them. When this child is not in their life anymore, it could happen as easy as a day.
But help me understand. I know this is a fairly recent development, the DNA, I mean recent in a medical time. And so this, how has this impacted men who've been raising the child for maybe 10, 12, even 15 years and suddenly finds out that this is not their child?
They are devastated, and the way that it relates to health is is a lot of stress, a lot of depression, a lot of withdrawal. And so the men sometimes have nowhere to go. I mean, there's no counseling specifically for this. There are no social people that are discussing this. So a lot of times these men have to bear this in silence.
Now, my question is, going through our medical school training, it's always, they've always said the cardinal rule was if you saw a happy family and they're giving birth, don't really mess it up if someone in the medical field sees something that's out of the norm. And as long as the father is happy, then why break up a happy family in that respect?
So it's a good question.
Yeah, well, the issue is now is that a lot of times the fathers are not happy, but when you're holding a new infant, that is also not the time to make important life decisions. And so we find that sometimes a few days later, it may sink into the men that this child doesn't look like me. And in the U.S., our laws were based on the 16th century common law, which is the assumption of paternity. So if you're married, your wife has a baby, unless a couple of things. One, you were away at sea for 13 months or more, you have a physical injury, and this one was social if the child is clearly of a different race. You could claim out of paternity, but other than that, men were stuck. The problem today becomes not the paternity, but fatherhood equals a check. So if you are assigned a child that is not yours, a lot of men are unable to get out of that financial responsibility. And these are the lawsuits that are coming up now, and the leader of this movement lives here in Georgia. His name is Carnell Smith. He spent 10 years raising the child, found out the child wasn't his, and spent another 3+ years and thousands of dollars trying to get his money back. And so it has taken many men years. And they find that they win, they're no longer responsible, but they cannot recoup the money. And so it raises a couple questions. Did the woman commit actual fraud? And who should reimburse these men? Should they get reimbursed?
But let me ask the question that Dr. Mack really asked. If a man has been raising a child for 10, 12 years, 15 years, that child has now bonded incredibly. He sees that male as his father. Is it fair to that child to just rip that union apart?
That is the question. Is it fair to rip it apart, or is it fair for the child to not know his actual genetic heritage? And the United Nations has actually mandated in their rights of the child that children have a right to know their biological parents. And it's important. Recently, we've seen cases where people had cancer. You get to the hospital, you want to donate a kidney, and you find out you're not a match for the child that you've been raising. And there's so many issues here because I interviewed one man. He raised a son for 16 years. He was found out that, or he had an idea. He always didn't think the child was his, but he raised him anyway. The court ordered the DNA testing. They got the test. He took his son to these beautiful cliffs in California, and they sat there with this envelope. And he said, "You can open it if you want to. I don't need to open it. You're my son, but if you want to open it, you can open it. If not, we can throw it off of this cliff." And the son chose to open it, and of course he wasn't really his father. And even though the father said, "I'll be here," the son doesn't know what to do anymore. He doesn't know how to look at him anymore.
It's almost cruel to the
double-edged sword.
Yes.
And I study men, but there's a whole, range of questions as to what is the mother's culpability here?
Well, and then her feelings, her whole range of her feelings on this issue too.
Yes, and historically, it's actually based on an idea of how women choose a mate. And I mentioned in my paper that women on their cycle may choose different men. Sometimes women are thinking of survival. Sometimes women are just thinking of the cutest. However, historically, they suggest that women chose the man who would keep those kids alive, not necessarily the one that they suspected was the biological father.